with a butterfly.
It's one of the only cat statues I had. We're not big cat people in this house, but I figured since this movie does kind of revolve around a statue of a cat in the form of the Baron, I figured I'd at least have a cat statue somewhere in the video, and it has a little butterfly on its nose. See? Butterfly. I actually got that at my neighbor's garage sale several years ago, and the butterfly either had broken off or it just broke off when I got it home, which is like walking down the block, like not very far. So I had to glue it. So hopefully that stays where it's supposed to. Time to talk about Whisper of the Heart. This is actually, it's one of the more subtle Studio Ghibli movies in the fact that there's not this huge, battle of good versus evil, human versus nature, bad humans versus good humans, whatever comparison you want to make it. It's very much a, kind of a slice of life version. I mean, like, not that Studio Ghibli hasn't done parts of that when it comes to, like, some bits of, like, My Neighbor Totoro is slice of life stuff. Some of the other, later on we'll get, From Up on Poppy Hill, that's very much like slice of life type things. But this one is kind of one of those more slice of life things, and the fact that there's not like this huge magical element to it. There's a fantasy element to it in the fact that it is about a girl who writes a fantasy story and loves fairy tales and stuff like that, but it's a different way of doing it.
Yes, it is. I love you. You've already gotten a bunch of attention from me this morning. You got to snuggle with me on the bed and sleep with me for a while. You can lay down and rest, and then you can snuggle with me while I edit this. You know the deal. But I'm a baby, and I need pets now. Yeah, I know you do.
So, as I said, this is going to be about Whisper of the Heart, which was directed by Yoshifumi Kondo, and came out in 1995. One thing I did learn while I was getting the notes ready for this is that it is actually based off of a manga by the same name by Aoi Hiragi. I apologize for mispronouncing that. That was published by Shueisha. So the same people, I believe, that eventually ended up publishing, One Piece and Black Clover and My Hero and Fairy Tail and Bleach and all that stuff. The screenplay was written by Hayao Miyazaki, and it is one of the first films that is not directed. I think it is actually the first film that is not directed by either Miyazaki or Takahata. And I think I read somewhere that there were thoughts for having Yoshifumi Kondo become the next person to be in charge of Studio Ghibli, become the successor to Miyazaki and Takahata, which I would say is a pretty good, even if it didn't quite happen, and I don't remember if it did or not, even if it didn't quite happen, it's still a pretty big accomplishment. So yeah. So going into the actual story, so the movie starts in 1994. I mean, the manga kind of took place a little bit earlier, but they just kind of set it in the time frame that they were making the movie, which is fair. It's not that big of a difference. It's not like people are running around with cell phones and smartphones and stuff like that in the movie. So it just takes place in the 90s, in the early 90s in Japan, which I would have been about 2 during the time frame that the movie would have been being set. So we are introduced to Shuzuku, who is the main character of the movie. She is a junior high school student, so she's in like middle school roughly. For by American standards, she'd be kind of like middle school, very early high school range. I know that the educational system in Japan has a slightly different setup than what we do, which some of that stuff gets talked about in the movie. And she just lives in this very cramped apartment with her mother and her father and her older sister, who is currently off at college. Her mother is studying for her doctorate degree, and her father is a librarian who works at this big university library in the middle of Tokyo. So they just have stacks of books all over their apartment, which small apartments are something that's very harped on a lot when it comes to certain Japanese shows and stuff like that, or anime and stuff like that, where it's just like we have either a very small apartment or it's a big house or a big apartment or somewhere in the middle. And they just have stacks of books everywhere and everything. But Shizuku is this girl who just adores reading, and it's in the middle of the summer, and her goal by the end of the summer is to have read 20 books. For her, this means that she is working on trying to read 20 different, I think they're probably all fantasy novels, given how she tends to, very much love fantasy and fairy tales and things like that, very, fiction books and stuff like that. And she's working her way through all these different books, and she ends up finding that there is this same name that keeps repeating on the library checkout cards, which I remember these cards. We had them here in the US. I think they were like a big system all over the world for how you could check out books. It was, you would go to the library, you'd find the book you want, you'd take it up to the librarian, you give them your library card, and then like they would, you or they would sign out on the library card checkout listing that would then go back in the book, so that way they would know who had the book, or who had checked out the book previously and stuff for part of their records. What can I say? I grew up around librarians. My mom is basically tech support for the Nebraska Library Commission, so I've grown up around librarians and libraries and everything like that, and I have great respect for librarians, and for the library system and what they provide to their community in places all over the world. So she keeps seeing the same name pop up, which is Seiji Yamasawa, and he's on all of these different cards, and he's like the one that checked it out before her in a lot of different cases, and she just like keeps seeing the name, and she becomes very curious about it. She's just like, his name just keeps popping up, and I'm not sure why. The next day, Shizuku goes to her school, which I guess is still open to a degree in the summer. The nurse is still there, and she goes and she has the nurse take her to the library. Or I think it's supposed to be the nurse, or it's just one of the other teachers that takes her to the library so she can get the book she wants, because it's not in the public library, so she gets the book there. And she ends up finding the name Amasawa, as in it was donated by Amasawa, stamped in the book. So this becomes part of a quest that she's looking on to try to find who this Amasawa is, and if they have connections to Seiji Yamasawa and everything like that. And then her friend Yuko shows up, and Yuko is a little bit more of this kind of the slightly more typical teenage girl, has boy problems, a little bit more worried about like her complexion and appearance and everything like that, but still very much studies very hard, which is a big thing that gets harped on in this movie, is studying hard for tests and courses and different things like that, because you want to be able to get into good high schools with good high school entrance exams scores and everything like that, which I mean, in college here in the US, you do, like, there are college entrance exams to a degree that you have to take, but I think both the SAT and the ACT are BS, because it's more it's testing your skills about how to do tests as opposed to necessarily your actual knowledge, because I am one of the people that does so much better when it comes to actually discussing topics as opposed to being able to answer questions on tests. I also have a gripe against the ACT or the SAT, whichever one it was I took, because I had to take it on my birthday, and I had to get up early to go to school to take it on my birthday on a Saturday, so I have a gripe with that. And this is coming from someone who did pretty well in high school. So Shizuku and Yuko go out, and they start just talking about they're best friends, and they are talking about these song lyrics that Shizuku translated from an American song. So the song is "Take Me Home, Country Roads," and which at the end of the movie they actually have the Japanese version of the song play. And my mom, who watched part of this with me last night, was just kind of sitting there singing along, but with the English words, because like she knows the tune and everything like that, which is kind of fun. And such. So we see that, and we see them both start singing and everything. And then because Shizuku didn't, thought that it was kind of corny, she ends up writing a concrete roads instead, because like country roads don't really apply to Tokyo. And then it's just like a parody song that she wrote, and they sing that, and they just start laughing and everything like that, which is just adorable to show their friendship. And then Yuko ends up telling Shizuku that she actually got a love letter, but Yuko doesn't want to do anything with the love letter because she actually likes someone else, who is this other boy that is in their class that is Sugimura. And he is just he's just kind of one of the guys in their class that they've both known for a long time, and probably went to elementary school with them and has been with them through junior high and everything like that. And he is actually on the baseball team that is currently playing or currently practicing during the time that they're talking. And he actually comes over and tries to get them to give him his bag that's on the bench. And they keep joking that he's a bench warmer, that he's never going to play and everything like that. And stuff like that. And we just see Yuko get very nervous and run off because she's blushing. And then Shizuku, after giving Sugimura his bag, then runs off after her friend. And, they're just kind of talking and everything like that. And Shizuku then realizes that she forgot her book. So she has to run back to the school, where she ends up finding her book being read by this other boy. And he doesn't introduce himself, but he's sitting there reading the book, and then he ends up, giving it back to her. And then he makes a comment about her lyrics, and he calls them corny, which she does not like. And this just infuriates Shizuku. And all the way home, she's just like, stupid jerk, stupid jerk, stupid jerk, stupid jerk, just like all the way home from the school, back to her apartment, back to her room. Stupid jerk, crunches up the lyrics, throw them away, goes back to the kitchen, pulls out something to drink, and it's still like, stupid jerk, the entire time, which is just very funny. And then Shizuku ends up eventually, calms down a little bit, and ends up just kind of getting very, I guess, and, very caught up in her, reading or whatever it is that she's doing. And eventually later that day, it is her sister returns home from college, who I think it's supposed to be that the sister either graduated, or is close to graduating, one of the two. And her older sister, who is, I don't remember the older sister's name, mostly because I don't think it's written here in the notes, ends up kind of griping against Shizuku for the fact that Shizuku doesn't seem to be taking care of all of the chores around the house that she's supposed to be doing. And like taking care of the dishes and the laundry and helping with cleaning and different things like that, because like their mom's busy and their dad's at work and everything like that. And like the older sister just starts griping on her for that. And so we get to see this like older sister, younger sister dynamic there, which I've mentioned before. There's a 12 years age gap between my sister and I. And so she was out of the house by the time I was old enough to do most any type of chores or anything like that. So that wasn't ever really an issue where it's just like, oh, you need to do this. Admittedly, my sister is not the tidiest person in the world. But I do know that like I will harp on my nieces and nephew when it comes to stuff like this. And my nieces and nephew will harp on each other when it comes to this. What are you doing? Her eyes being puppy. I know you are. So we get to see this like sister dynamic and everything like that. And even in the English dub, the lady who plays the sister even admits, yes, she's bratty. So yeah, we get that. So then we cut to the next day, and Shizuku is told by her sister to take lunch to their dad at the library because he forgot his lunch before he left for work. And then the sister and Shizuku's like, why do I have to do that? And the sister's like, fine, then you can do this and this and this and this and this, and for all these different chores around the house. And Shizuku's like, fine, I'll take the lunch. Go to the library anyway. And Shizuku, gets on to one of the, the various trains that's, around Tokyo that takes you to the different places around Tokyo, because Tokyo is so big and not everybody has cars, and sometimes it's just way too far to walk or bike. And she gets on the train, and this big cat ends up sitting down next to her, and he gets off at the same stop she does, and she ends up following him for a little while, and then eventually she ends up just losing him. And then she ends up finding him again. Well, she's still on her way to the library, and then she follows him again. And while she's following him, he ends up leading her to this house where he's just like teasing this dog by wagging his tail over the fence, and the dog can't reach him. So the cat's a jerk. And then this leads to Shizuku ends up finding this very nice little quaint neighborhood antique shop. That is a beautifully designed building. And she goes inside, and she ends up seeing, all the stuff that's all over the walls, and all, everything that's in like this antique shop and everything. It's like going into antique shops can be very fun, because it's just like, ooh, what am I going to find? What kind of treasures are buried here? And it's just like, may not be able to afford it, but it's a very nice looking object, vase, dress, hat, toys, whatever. That is kind of a weird thing when it's like, oh, toys that I played with when I was a kid are now in antique shops. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a sad thing. That makes me feel old, to a degree. So she's like looking around the antique shop, and then she sees this statue of a cat, very dapper looking cat, standing there on this table, and she goes over and she starts looking at it. And then she ends up interacting with this old man whose name is Shiro Nishi, or Mr. Nishi is just what he's referred to as. And he's just this very nice, kind old man and everything like that. And he ends up, talking to Shizuku, and he ends up showing her this beautiful grandfather clock that he has been restoring. And he shows her that he's putting in this last piece to, try to see if it's going to work the way that it's supposed to. And he's like, finishing everything up, and Shizuku's kind of just watching this type of a thing, interacting with him a little bit and everything like that. Like he's having to stand on this very, unsteady, little step stool thing, and she helps steady it so he doesn't fall and everything like that. And what ends up happening is, they start up the clock, and we get this nice little story where, as we watch the clock work, we see as it strikes 12, and part of the clock opens up, and we see all these little dwarves, mining and a little bit like that. That's like I guess it might be a slight homage. Well, I mean, I know in fairy tales, dwarves are generally like miners and stuff like that, but I think it's also like a slight reference to like Disney for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because they're getting like these huge gems and stuff like that as they're mining and everything like that. And of course, in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the dwarves get these diamonds and stuff like that that are like the size of your fist. And like just like 2 of those would make anybody comfortable for the rest of their life if they could sell it, type of a thing. So we see that, and then we also see on the clock face, as the clock face, as it strikes 12 and everything like that, we see at the top there is this sheep, and when it strikes 12, the sheep changes into a fairy, and then in the bottom, on I think it's the 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock mark, out comes the Dwarf King, and he's looking up at the fairy. And we get this interaction between Shizuku and Mr. Nishi as he's explaining the story, and he's like, there's a story that goes along with this clock. They both live in different worlds, because he's the king of the dwarves. Only while the clock is striking 12 can she return, as in the fairy, return from being a sheep to her original world. And so he too shows himself this way every time that it strikes 12. He keeps waiting for the princess. I'm sure the craftsman who made this clock had an unfulfilled love, or kind of the way that it's translated into the English for the English dub is like had a love that was very far away type of a thing. So it's like it's this fairy tale type thing that's being played out on the clock face, which is just beautiful. Again, like with any Miyazaki movie, I love the details that are put into this and everything like that. And you know, that is one of the things about like an artist, even if it's just like these inanimate objects on a clock face type of a thing, that yeah, maybe they move around or they can, you know, stuff like that a little bit, but it's, you know, the fact that they can put this type of emotion into just this clock face meant that whatever artisan made it did an amazing job with it, because even with that, she's like, yeah, you can kind of feel how sad they are still and everything. So they have this nice little conversation, and then she realizes, because a different clock starts chiming, she realizes, oh no, I'm late getting my dad's stuff to the library. So as she's running out of the building, she actually, as she's running out of the shop, she accidentally ends up leaving her bag there that had her dad's lunch in it. And as she's running down these steps down to where the library is, because she's not very far from the library, we get this gorgeous view of her running down the steps and like Tokyo just like splaying out in front of her, and she's like, it feels like you're flying and everything like that. And right when she's about to reach the library, she gets called. She hears her name's called. She hears her name called, and she turns and she sees the same boy from the other day, who had been the one to find her book and was reading her lyrics. And she ends up, and he's like, hey, you forgot this and everything like that, because he's giving her the lunch that got left at the antique shop, and it's supposed to be that he's the grandson of Mr. Nishi. And he like comments on it being like a big lunch and how she must eat like a pig, and she just gets very angry at him again about this, which just infuriates her even more. And he like rides off on the bike with the cat on the back as he's like singing the corny lyrics she wrote and everything like that. So she's just like not happy about that. And she goes into the library, like kind of complains to her father after she gives him his, you know, lunch and everything like that. So we just get that. And then sometime later, it's time for school to start again and everything like that. And it's time for, you know, Shizuku to head back to school and all of that. And we see, you know, her interacting with Yuko and Sujimura and everything like that. And Yuko kind of tries to, or not Yuko, Shizuku tries to kind of set up Yuko and Sujimura and everything like that. And, you know, they have like tests on the first day, I guess, to like see how much, you know, how much they remember from over the summer and everything like that from before the summer happened and all of that type of stuff. So I guess they can have an idea of how much they need to reteach them at the beginning of the year. And so we get to see all of that stuff and everything. And, you know, Shizuku, you know, is trying to help Yuko get set up with Sujimura and everything like that, just because she wants to help her friend and all of that stuff. And then eventually it ends up being that Shizuku ends up going to one of the teachers because she wants to ask them about like the stamp that's donated by Mr. Amasawa in the book and see what they can tell her. So she goes and talks to one of the teachers, and he explains that, oh, Dr. Amasawa was part of like the PTA, and he donated a bunch of these books a little while ago. His son is actually in your same grade, Seiji. You might know him. And so we see all of that, and then as Shizuku keeps trying to picture who she thinks is Seiji Amasawa, and the one that keeps popping into her head is, of course, the boy who read her lyrics and everything like that. Which, spoiler alert, and you probably guessed this, he's Seiji Amasawa. But she doesn't quite figure that out yet, but she's kind of like really worried that he is. And we have this moment where like she goes past him in the hallway and she's just kind of like glaring at him to a degree. So we get like those interactions, and we get other, you know, kind of, you know, school friend interactions, you know, with Yuko being there and everything like that. And they have this, you know, Yuko and Shizuku eat lunch with some of their other friends and stuff like that that are part of the, that are all kind of like in the choir I guess, and like, shows Shizuku showing them her different lyrics and everything like that. And she gets, they're kind of like all teasing her about having, a boy that she likes, and everything like that. So they're all teasing her about that. And then she's like, fine, I won't give you any more lyrics. And they're like, no, we're sorry. So we're just like, that nice little friend group thing that they have there. And eventually it ends up being that, like, on her way home from school one day, she stops by the shop only to find it closed. And she's, like, kind of worried that maybe something happened to Mr. Nishi, or she's just, worried because she looks in and she can't see the Baron on the table, so she thinks he's gone and everything. And then later that night, she gets this call from Yuko, and she goes down and she ends up talking to her friend, and Yuko has been crying. Just like, bags under her eyes and bloodshot. She's just like so upset and everything. And Yuko is just like, Shizuku is just like, what happened? And she's like, I talked to Sujimura, and he talked to me, and he told me that, like, a friend of his is the one who sent me the love letter, and that he was a really nice guy, and that I should give him a chance. And okay, high school / junior high romance drama. Some people crave it. I'm also like, okay, I didn't care much for that when I was in high school. I mean, I guess I had the typical crush on someone, but it wasn't like, oh my god, it consumed my every waking moment. Or like, it's like, I know it's not going to happen, so why should I worry? Why should I care? Type of a thing. But it wasn't, it wasn't this. But of course, when you're in high school or when you're in junior high and you have like that first person that you have this crush on type of a thing, and if they don't like return your feelings, I guess it can be a lot harder of a thing depending on, how much you feel, how much connection you feel with that and everything. And apparently Yuko, when she had been talking to Sujimura, had ended up calling him a jerk and everything and then running off. And she's like, I can't go to school like this. I look horrible and everything like that. And Shizuku's like, we have tests. And she's like, I know. And it's like, okay. So Shizuku is being this good friend to Yuko and everything like that, and trying to, help Yuko calm down and feel better a little bit, I guess, or like listen to her in her complaining, which sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes that's all you want someone to do, is just listen to your complaining, so you can at least voice it and get it off your chest. I know exactly how that feels. And so we get that. And then, of course, the next day at school, Shizuku calls Sujimura a jerk again. And then they end up talking. And Sujimura ends up... He didn't intend to make Yuko cry. But what ends up happening is, as Shizuku and Sujimura go off and they kind of have like this little private talk, it ends up being Yuko, or they end up talking about Yuko, and Shizuku ends up saying the reason she's upset is because she doesn't like your friend. It's not that your friend's bad or anything like that. It's just that she doesn't like your friend. She likes you. And that's why it's like, you told the girl who likes you that she should go out and, get to know your friend. And Sujimura's like, wait, Yuko likes me? No, that can't be right. I have a crush on someone else. And through all of this, it ends up getting revealed that Sujimura has a crush on Shizuku, and that he has for quite a long time. And Shizuku is like, no, you can't have a crush on me. That never happens to me. I'm not that type of a girl. And he's like, he doesn't care. He just still has the crush on her and everything like that. And it's not like he tries to force anything on her or anything like that. There is a moment where she tries to go and he like grabs her hand, not like in a mean way or in a hard way, but like he grabs her hand so he can at least finish talking to her and they can finish this conversation before they go their separate ways. And she had called Sujimura dense for not noticing that Yuko likes her. And then when Shizuku finally gets home, she starts sobbing on her desk, and she's like, you're the dense one now, and everything like that, because she's so dense, because she never noticed that Sujimura liked her, even though she griped on him for the fact that he didn't notice that, you know, Yuko liked him and all of this other stuff. So we got like a little love triangle going there, type of a thing. Although Shizuku doesn't have an interest in Tsujimura. So we get like that type of a thing going on there. And she just, you know, ends up falling asleep at her desk from crying and everything like that. And she's just like really upset. Later on, she does end up going back to the shop where she ends up noticing that the cat is still there. Or the real cat, not the statue of the one, the fat cat is still there. And she like sits and talks with him, and she's like, I'm not a nice person at all, am I? And, you know, kind of like the, you know, talk out your feelings with the animal. I've done that. You just sit and talk your feelings out to, you know, whatever animal will sit and listen to you because they're getting pets and, you know, attention and whatever. And while she's there, she ends up just like sitting there talking to the cat out in front of the store, and then eventually Seiji shows up. She doesn't know that he's Seiji. She's kind of tried to like convince herself that there's no way he's Seiji Yamasawa, because like the sign on the, you know, on the antique shop says, you know, Nishi, not Amasawa, and everything like that. So she's kind of like tried to convince herself that, oh, there's no way that's Amasawa. That can't be him. Seiji shows up, and she ends up, she asks about his grandpa, making sure that grandpa's okay, and he's like, oh yeah, he's fine. And he's like, I see you found Moon, or Muta, and he's like, because he looks like a full moon, because he's a fat cat, everything like that. And he explains that the cat doesn't really have an owner. He just kind of like wanders around the neighborhood, and he's got a bunch of different names and everything like that. So I guess he's a little bit like Tramp from Lady and the Tramp, for the way that Tramp starts out in the movie, where he just like, he's got like a different house for every night of the week and everything like that, and he can, you know, choose where he wants to go for food or whatever and all of that stuff. And he's got like different names depending on what, you know, business or what house he's near that gives him food and all of that stuff. So, you know, we kind of, you know, Muta's a little bit like that. And what ends up happening is they, you know, Seiji lets her inside, and he ends up showing her the Baron statue again, and he shows her that the way that the Baron's eyes are done is that sometimes in the process of making the statue, the eyes will kind of get cracks in them, so that way when the light hits them at the right point, it will reflect the light or refract the light in a very interesting way. So he's showing that to Shizuku, and she finds that, you know, very beautiful and everything like that. And I believe during this part of this conversation, I think Seiji apologizes for calling her lyrics corny. And you know, she sees that the grandfather clock's gone, and that, you know, he's like, oh yeah, it was just being restored, and the person who had owned it came and picked it up and everything like that. And yeah, they kind of have this thing where they kind of like joke a little bit back and forth, but like he apologizes for, you know, saying that she had a big lunch and everything like that, because she ate too much from, you know, that the lunch was, you know, so big for just her, and, you know, that he's, you know, sorry for calling her lyrics corny and everything like that. And, you know, so they kind of have this like thing where they're kind of, you know, where he's apologizing to her for the way that he had acted before and everything. And, you know, he lets her in, and like when they had gone in through the back, they had looked out over the back of the house, and like they have this gorgeous view of just where Tokyo just stretches out below them, because like where they live is like up on this hill, and the way that the house is designed is that it kind of like clings to the side of the hill for how the neighborhood is designed. So as they look out, they can just see the gorgeousness of Tokyo spread out before them, which I don't think, no, there wouldn't really be any place around Lincoln that would have that type of a view. Lincoln's a fairly flat city in comparison. Omaha has a few, you know, higher hills in it that, like, if you get to a certain point, you can see a fair distance in them, but it's not really. Lincoln and Omaha and the surrounding areas are mostly flat in comparison to other places in the country. there's jokes in parts of like central Nebraska where it's flat enough that you can just like see for miles in any direction, and then if you want to just see further, stand at a crate and you'll just see even further. With as flat as everything is. So yeah, we don't really have that type of setup here, where you can like have a house in that type of a situation and then just look out over this gorgeousness of the city. So like they're just kind of talking, and Seiji, leaves her upstairs so she can, talk to the Baron or see the Baron, and he goes down and, is working in the little workshop area down there. And then when Shizuku is done talking, done looking at the Baron, she then goes downstairs and she sees him there, and he is working on carving a violin because they have violin making lessons at the antique shop and everything like that, and Seiji is actually very good at making violins, and he wants to have that be what he does as a profession, is to make violins. He wants to go to Cremona, Italy, and learn how to make violins, be taught by a master about how to do it and everything. And so him and Shizuku are talking and everything like that, and he's just kind of showing her some of the stuff in the workshop, and then she's like, well, which violin is yours? And he ends up showing her that he does have a violin, and he's like, I'm not a very good at playing violin, but I can. And he starts playing the violin, which I apologize because my older niece played both the violin and the viola when she was in school, and don't ask me about any of that. That would be the question for her. I was like, nope. I played the trumpet for 9 months and I didn't want to do it again. I did that in 5th grade. I don't want to do it again. Sorry, Dad. Nope. And he starts playing Country Roads Takes Me Home, and she ends up singing her translation of it. And then while they're playing, Mr. Nishi, along with two of his friends, show up at the antique shop, and they come downstairs because they hear them playing and the singing and the music and everything, and they come downstairs and they start playing their individual instruments and singing along and everything to Shizuku and everything like that. So they have this nice moment where they're all singing and having fun and everything. And then when it's done, she gets introduced to, Mr. Nishi's 2 friends, and then he eventually, and then he calls, Seiji, and she just has this moment where she like flips out because she's like, you're Seiji Yamasawa? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I thought your last name was Nishi. And he's like, well, that's my grandfather's last name. And like the 3 old guys are there watching this, and Shizuku just is like, which is adorable, because she's kind of like freaking out, and she's like, you never told me your name. And he's like, oh, I thought I did. Yeah, it's Seiji Yamasawa. And she's like, So we get that fun bit there. And eventually it ends up leading to, later that night, Seiji walks her partway home and everything like that. And they're just discussing, the fact that he wants to go to Cremona, Italy, and, study to become, how to make violins and everything like that. But his parents don't really necessarily want him to do that, but his grandfather wants to help him and everything like that. And, so they kind of like see each other off and everything like that, and she's in a much better mood and everything. And then the next day at school, Seiji gets teased by Yuko for the fact that she was seen out with a boy from another class and everything like that. So we have those going on. And later on that day, Sugimura does have a chat with Yuko, and that he won't tell his friend, or he won't try to pressure her to try to go out with his friend anymore, type of a thing. So like they're, I guess, getting better. And then later that day, again, Seiji shows up at her classroom, at Shizuku's classroom, and he ends up, asking for it. The whole class just erupts into this roarish cheer about Shizuku finally has a boyfriend, type of a thing. And Shizuku angrily storms out of the room and like drags Seiji with her, and they go all the way up to the roof so they can talk, but it's raining outside, so they're kind of like stuck on part of the roof and they can't really go all the way out. And he's explaining that his father said yes, that he will be allowed to go to Italy, But, well, he'll be there for like 2 months, but he then has to, kind of audition with one of his grandpa's friends that works there, that is the master of a violin making studio. Because earlier on he had stated that, well, violins, are all just made of wood, and that's kind of the same basic design that goes over for hundreds and hundreds of years that they've been making violins. It's all based upon the hands of the craftsmen for how well the violin will sound and everything like that. Like, I'm sure most people have heard when it comes to violin that like the height of it is like a Stradivarius violin. That is a violin that was made for, that is made out of very specific wood and stuff like that and such. So it's like there are certain things there. And I'm just like, anybody that can make an instrument out of like all that type of stuff and go through all that stuff is just amazing already, in my opinion. If you can do that, that's just amazing. If you can carve all of that or make, brass and stuff instruments by hand and everything like that, it's just like amazing. For people who can do that. So like as they're talking, he's like, well, I'm going to be gone for about 2 months and everything like that. And they end up, the rain stops, so they go further out under the roof to look out over the city and over the school and everything like that. And while they're having this conversation, Seiji is revealing that, well, I noticed you reading books in the library all the time, and I even sat down next to you a couple of times and you didn't notice me. And I, decided to try to get your attention by like checking out all of these different types of books, so that way my name would be on the book list first, ahead of yours, and maybe that would get your attention. It did. But like, so he's like, I read all sorts of books and everything like that to try to get your attention. So they're having this nice conversation, and while this is going on, their classmates are all like looking around the door, like all like the whole joke of like them trying to look around the door at what's going on, to see, Seiji and Shizuku talking and everything like that. So they're doing that, and then eventually they're not very quiet about it, and they eventually end up interrupting them, and then they get chased off by Shizuku and everything like that. And then she's kind of upset that Seiji is going to be leaving, and she, when they just kind of started to have this friendship and everything like that, and he even makes a comment that it's just like, yeah, and now that you actually start to notice me, now I have to leave for 2 months type of a thing to go and do this. It's really bad timing. It's like the whole, like, it's like the joke in, teen romances. It's like, as soon as we're together, I got a call from my dad. We have to go back to the States now type of thing, as opposed to staying here in paradise or whatever type of a thing. It's like, or like the military family is like, yeah, my dad got reassigned. We leave in 2 days. Different things like that happen. So it's just like a little bit of like that kind of like trope that happens there. And what ends up happening is that evening, Shizuku goes to Yuko's house, and they end up talking. And Shizuku is kind of distraught at this point in time, because now she's the one with the boy problems and not Yuko and everything. And she's like, she wants to support Seiji going to Italy and trying to achieve his dream and everything like that. But the way it'll be is like, he'll be gone for 2 months, he'll come back for graduation, and then he'll be back in Italy for like so many years while he's training to make violins and everything like that. And she's like, well, he'll be gone so much and I'll hardly see him and everything like that. And so it's, she's kind of, worried about that and everything like that. She's like, I want to support him, but he's going to be off doing that. And like, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what I want to do with my life, because like Shizuku hasn't thought about what she wants to do with her life. And either earlier on in the movie or soon in the movie, she's going to have this conversation with her sister about, well, what'll happen is, or she ends up having a conversation with her sister where she asks her, how did you know what you wanted to do in life? And her sister's like, well, based on your college entrance exams, that'll determine what high school you'll get into, or the high school entrance exams will determine what high school you go into, and then from there, it'll just kind of be determined for you type of a thing, as opposed to, trying to do something that you actually really want to do, or wanting to follow your dream, as opposed to this is what has been set out for you, which is something that pops up a lot of the time in a lot of media of like, this is what society has laid out for you, or this is what your parents have laid out for you, And it's like, you know, is this what you're going to go after, or are you going to go and try to do something else? Or are you going to try to make your own path and that type of stuff, which is kind of where some bits of this movie come into play. And Yuko had pointed out that Shizuku does have talent when it comes to writing and stuff like that. And, you know, you love stories and everything like that, so why don't you write a story? And Shizuku ends up vowing that she is going to write a story. And, you know, eventually it ends up being that she goes back to the antique shop where she talks to Mr. Nishi again and everything like that. And she asks him for permission because she wants to write a story about the Baron. So she asks him for permission if she can use the Baron as inspiration in her story, and he tells her yes, and he tells her a little bit about, you know, the story of the Baron and everything like that. He tells her the name is, I think it's Baron Humbert von Gickington, I think is what the name is for the Baron. That gets a little bit more explained in The Cat Returns, which of course is kind of a sequel to this, to a degree. One of the rare Miyazaki movies that kind of has a sequel, and such. But what ends up happening is, you know, so they're talking and everything, and Mr. Nishi ends up actually pulling out this kind of like hunk of stone, this hunk of rock, and giving it to Shizuku, and tells her to look inside of it, and he like glows this you know, glow stick light or whatever behind it, and it lights up, and it has like the kaleidoscope effect because there's so many different types of jewels in it. And he's like, that's called beryl. There's an inclusion of raw emerald. That's right, you and Seiji both. You're like that stone. Unpolished stones in their natural state. Now, like, even unpolished stones I like even unpolished stones very much, but things like violin making and story writing are different. You have to find the rough gems inside yourself, take the time and polish them. It's a very time-consuming work. That rock has a largest stone, right? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, actually, that one, when you polish it, instead turns out to be worthless. The smaller ones further inside are of higher purity, and in part you can't see from the outside. There might be even bigger stones. Ah, this won't do. You get old and you start rambling and everything, or like start getting preachy and everything like that. He's basically using the stone as a metaphor for, you know, Seiji wants to make violins, and Seiji has been working so hard and practicing for several years to be able to make violins. It's not something that you can just do right off the bat. And that is one thing that is pointed out in the movie, is like perfection is not expected right off the bat. It's like you look through all of history, and for example, I watched a video the other day about the history about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, when it comes to the two movies versus the book and comparisons and stuff like that. And how the original draft for the original story by Roald Dahl was very different, and that it ended up getting, you know, it was, you know, a raw material that ended up getting polished and changed to the point where it ended up becoming the book that ended up getting changed again and becoming the two movies. And, you know, while they are all very similar in certain cases, some have other parts that shine so much better than other parts do in other parts of the book or other parts of the other two movies. And that there is this difference that happens between, you know, the original work and what it ends up being. You see this with movies so often, you see this with TV shows, you see this with books, you see this with video games, you see this with manga and everything like that. Where it's, you know, you start off with one thing, you start off with this part of an idea, and then maybe by the time you get to the end, by the time the author or the creator gets to the end of it, the core idea is still there. It's just they've smoothed out so many of the rough edges, and they've managed to make it better than what it was originally by holding on to the pieces that really connected with people, or the parts of it that were the best parts, and then finding ways to reshape the other parts around it to still make the story work. We see Oda do this with One Piece all the time. where it's like, oh, this was something that like was looked on initially as like a story plot hole in one part of the story, and then he's like adjusted it later on to make it, no, that makes sense to a degree. You see this when it comes to the Harry Potter books. You see this when it comes to even, you know, my dad likes the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series or stuff there. You know, it's all types of stuff will have that, where it's like the stories have been polished again and again and again to make them even better. And the same thing happens with art. It's, you know, people don't just start out being able to make great art. It takes a lot of practice, and that's what Mr. Nishi is trying to explain to Shizuku here. That it's like people who are artists or creative, or even people who are scientists to a degree, or, you know, architects or engineers or stuff like that. You know, there's pieces there that you just need to polish to get it so you have this skill. And, you know, it just depends on which parts you're willing to polish that have the most value for you. And what necessarily has the most value for you may not have the most value for someone else. And that's kind of like the lesson he's trying to give her. And she takes that into consideration, and then she ends up, you know, going home, and she ends up deciding that she's going to write the story, and it's, you know, The Whisper of the Heart by Shizuku. And she spends so much time working on how to write it, and we have these moments through this part where we cut back and forth between Shizuku through what she's writing in the story, where we have like the story version of her interacting with the Baron and him, you know, leading her on this journey in this magical world and everything like that just looks gorgeous. That's this world that Shizuku dreamt up and everything like that as she writes. And, you know, so we get to see those interactions. We see stuff where we cut back and forth between, like, what's going on in the real world with Shizuku and everything like that, with, you know, studying and, you know, different things like that, where she's putting more emphasis on her story writing than she is on her actual studying and everything like that. There's one where she's at the library, and her dad sees her in the non-fiction section, which he finds very bizarre, and she's sitting there reading, and she ends up finding this in one of the books, she ends up finding this picture of a prisoner who is actually in a cell, and he's making a violin in the cell. And I believe this is a famous etching, but I couldn't find specifically what it was. But she sees that, and that makes her think of Seiji. And it's like the day before Seiji is going to be leaving, and he's found her at the library, and he sits down next to her, and like he kind of just like stays next to her while she's working, while she's doing her research and everything like that. And so, you know, like they talk a little bit and everything, because he wanted to say goodbye before he's going to be heading out. And, you know, so they have that nice little moment there and everything. And then she continues to work and work and work on her story. And, like, he kind of encourages her with that. Well, he, you know, they don't really communicate while he's gone, but, like, he encouraged her before he goes. But unfortunately, while all this is happening, her schoolwork is kind of suffering. And during the moments while we have this going on, as I said, we cut back and forth between like the fantasy stuff that she's writing in her book and what's going on in the real world. And one of the ones in the fantasy book is that that the Baron is kind of telling his origin story, that he's like, oh, you know, the artisan that made me and Louise, who is, you know, his love, his pair, that, you know, they made us and we were happy and everything like that, but then there was like an evil cat that showed up and whisked her away, I guess is the way that it's supposed to be implying and everything. And then there's like another moment in it where Shizuku, you know, in the story, and like the story she's writing, where the character, the girl character that is supposed to be based off of Shizuku, is like running through this cave, and she has to find a certain crystal, and only one of them is real. And so she's trying to find the right crystal, and she finds one and pulls it out, and it glows, and then it turns into like a dead bird, which is not good. And then she pops out of that and back into school, where she's supposed to be, you know, answering a question in class, but she can't, because she's too distracted and everything like that. And eventually her mother ends up getting called to the school, where she ends up talking to the teacher, and the teacher explains that she got really bad grades on this mock quiz and everything like that, so that's not good. And, you know, her mom goes home and ends up talking to the sister and her sister, to Shizuku's older sister, and Shizuku's the sister is like, well, Yeah, these test scores are not good. And she's also like, they're kind of doing this whole moment where it's like the older daughter is kind of being portrayed as like much more of like the typical daughter that you would expect out of this type of a family, where it's like a very education orientated family and everything like that, which an education orientated family is not a bad thing. It all just depends. And in my family it was kind of flipped. My sister wasn't as much into school as I was, and once I got to college I just didn't care that much for it because it wasn't the way that I wanted to learn. But there's like that there's sometimes you get ones that are more interested in this and ones that are more interested in that and everything like that, and you just have to try to make sure that you have like a good system to help support both of them. The older sister also says that like, oh, I'm gonna get ready to move out soon and everything like that, so I'll be doing that. And the older sister ends up actually harping on Shizuku to the point where she is she's harping on her for the fact that she's not focusing on school the way that she should. She's not going to get into a good high school. She's not going to get into a good college. And Shizuku's like, well, maybe I don't want to go to college. Maybe I don't want to do that. And everything like that. So it's like this whole argument back and forth on them. It was just like, this is what you were told to do by society, is what the older sister's saying. And Shizuku's like, but what if it's not what I want to do? What if I want to do something different? So we have that argument going on there, and like as this is going on, the dad gets home and he hears part of this argument, and then he's like, okay, no, I will talk to Shizuku. And eventually it ends up being Shizuku sits down with her mother and father, and they see the test scores and everything like that. And the mom, I mean, like, both of the parents are worried, which is fair. Generally, if you have a kid that does pretty well in school and like the grades start slipping and you're not sure why, you get concerned, which is again very fair. Some cases it's too much work on the kid, and other cases it's the kid is not challenged enough, so they're not paying as much attention. In this case, it's Shizuku is trying to focus on her story, and she ends up explaining to a degree what's going on. She's like, I am trying to write this story, and I really want to, and I really want to see if it's something that I can do. And they kind of have this very serious talk, and it ends up being, the father ends up being the one that is a bit more sympathetic towards her for this. And he ends up saying, fine, you can continue to do that. You can continue to write your story or whatever it is that you're working on. And then after that, focus on school again and everything like that. And the Shizuku eventually does end up finishing her story, and she takes it to Mr. Nishi because she had made the deal with him that that he would be the first one to read the story when she was finished. So she finishes up and she goes back to the antique shop where she talks to Mr. Nishi and gives him her manuscript so he can read it, which is all handwritten, which is just like, ow. It's like typing out a whole story is hard enough. Handwriting it, oh good lord, child, ow. Hand's gonna hurt by the time you're done. So we see that, and we see him, he goes to read it, and Shizuku just kind of like sits outside on like the little balcony area and waits next to Muta, because she's just like she's very anxious about it, and she doesn't want to be in the same room with him as he's reading it. And he comes back out and he tells her, thank you, that was very good. And she's like, no, it's a lie. A lie. Please tell me the truth. The things I wanted to write don't fit together. The second half is ridiculous. I know this myself. And he's like, right? It's rough. Unusable, unfinished. It's like Seiji's violins. You definitely showed me your freshly quarried stone. You did your very best, didn't you? You're terrific. There's nothing to get upset over. Please take your time and do a solid job polishing it. So it's basically he's telling her, this is your rough draft. This is like the first part of this. This is like the stones you pulled out of the quarry. And now it's your job to go through and work on cutting and polishing the stone to the point where it is ready to be this gorgeous piece of art that can be on display and that people can read and everything like that. And that is what happens so often when it comes to stories and stuff like that, where people will write so many, they'll write out their story, and then they will have someone else read it, and then they can work through on figuring out, okay, this was good, maybe this part can be worked on, this is good here, this part's not very good here, but there might be something, that's what happens. And he's like giving her that advice and everything, and he brings her inside and he makes her noodles, and they're just sitting and talking and everything like that. And he's like, you're much less upset than Seiji was the first time he made a violin and it didn't go very well. So they're just like sitting and talking, and before Shizuku had showed up, Mr. Nishi had actually been having this dream where he was dreaming that this beautiful woman had finally returned to the shop and found him, and that they were going to be happy again. And then he's telling Shizuku the story about how he found the Baron in the first place, and he's like, well, the Baron, I actually found him in a shop in Germany so many years ago before the war, and I had, we found him, this woman that I was with, this Lucille, is the name of what the Baron's wife is, that the two of us wanted to purchase the Baron and wanted to purchase Lucille, but the female cat was off for repairs. And, so the grandfather ended up buying the Baron, and, him and Lucille made the deal that when the female cat was finally, available, that she would buy it, and then she would return to Japan and see him, and that they would be able to, not only would the Baron and his love be reunited, but the grandfather and his love would be reunited. So we're seeing that comparison there. And what ends up happening is, so we're getting like that part of the story, and so it's like it's this kind of tragic love story and everything like that. And that, it's hinted that, she never returned because the Baron doesn't have his love anymore. That they're still both waiting for their love to return to them. And he says, but that was before the war and everything like that, when I was a young man, so that would be referring to before World War II and everything like that, and all of that broke out in Europe. So eventually what ends up happening is, Shizuku goes, he takes her back home, or drives her back home, so she's not having to ride late at night, and she goes home and she tells her parents, I'm done with my project for now. I will be focusing on school, and I will be focusing on trying to get into a good high school. So she's made the decision that, okay, the story that I have is something that I am going to keep. She probably will keep the draft, and it's implied that she can keep the draft, and she can, of course, go through it again later, have other people's opinions about it, and see what parts are really good that she wants to keep, and then see what she needs to adjust from there. And polish her story more from the raw gem that it is into what would be, a very beautiful piece of, art later on. So we're seeing her make that decision, and she tells her parents, I'm going to focus on school, so you don't have to worry about that. I'll be fine and everything. And by this point, her sister has moved out and everything, so it's just Shizuku in the room. And she ends up waking up really early the next morning before sunrise, and she looks out her window, and she actually sees Seiji on his bike. And she's like, oh my god, she's really happy to see them. She's like, this isn't a dream type of a thing. And she like runs downstairs and, without her coat, and she runs outside. And Seiji is just like so happy to see her, and he gets, she gets on his bike after he, is the gentleman, and gives her his jacket so she's not cold. And she gets on the bike, and they ride up. They're riding to an unspecified location, but they have to go up this very steep hill. And he's like, I'm gonna do this on my own, and she's like, no, I'm not gonna be a burden. She gets off and like helps push him up the hill on the bike and everything like that, to show that she's like, I'm not just gonna sit around. I'm gonna help. I'm gonna support you, and you're gonna support me, and we're gonna work together on what we want to do for our dreams. And they end up getting to this part where they get to this hill set up, and they can look out over Tokyo. And with all of the fog and everything like that, all of the mist, it looks like an ocean and everything. And Seiji's like, This is my secret spot. It's just about time. I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you this. Grandpa was telling me about you. I didn't do anything to cheer you on. I was thinking of nothing but myself." And she's like, "No, because of you, I was able to try my best. I'm glad I pushed myself because I understand myself a little better than before. I'm going to study more, and I've decided to go to high school too." And as they're talking, the sun starts to rise over the clouds and over Tokyo, and it just looks gorgeous. And I told my mom when we were watching this, I was like, I will forever be amazed by hand-drawn animation, by the beauty that can be conveyed with hand-drawn animation and stuff. No matter, just animation in general, I will be continued to be amazed by, but just hand-drawn animation of what they are able to create with just what they're able to draw. I will always be amazed by that. And as the sun rises and everything like that, Seiji and Shizuku are like, Seiji's like, well, I'm going to continue high school and everything as well. And, I'm not quite ready to go and do violins and have that be my life, but I'm going to stick here for, for high school and everything. And then I can go back. And, it's kind of like maybe you can come with me is implied there. And, so they're just kind of, they're like, he was like, someday I'll make violins and you can be an amazing writer and everything like that. And then he ends up, in the Japanese, he technically asks her to marry him. In the English, he just like kind of, shouts out, "I love you, Shizuku," as he's hugging her and everything like that. And that's just kind of like how the movie ends. Declaring his love for her and everything like that. I was just like, you guys hopefully end up spending a bit of time trying to get to know each other better. But it's like the story of like first romances and everything like that, first school and all of that stuff, and first loves and everything along those lines. That gets implied there and all of that stuff. And so there's some of that gets implied. In regards to, that's pretty much where the movie ends. The end credits have like Country Road and everything like that being played over them, and everything, so that's nice there. In regards to the cast, Shizuku is voiced by Brittany Snow, who I mostly know from Hairspray, from like the 2007, I think, version of Hairspray with Zac Efron and all of that, and John Travolta and all of that stuff. Brittany Snow plays kind of like the mean girl type of character. And then Seiji is voiced by David Gallagher, who is, of course, from Seventh Heaven. And then we have, there's not, I think the dad, Shizuku's parents, the dad is voiced by James Sikking, who I really don't know, and then the mom is voiced by Jean Smart, who my mom recognized, but I don't recognize. The Baron is, of course, voiced by Cary Elwes, of course, as he would be later on voiced again in The Cat Returns and everything like that, for how that works. Mr. Nishi is voiced by Harold Gould, who I don't remember specifically what I've seen him in, but I'm sure I have. And then the older sister, Shiho, is voiced by Courtney Thorne Smith. Again, not really super familiar with her. The other one on here that I do know is Yuko, is voiced by Ashley Tisdale, who of course I know because I am a Disney Channel kid, and she's of course from Zack and The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, and she's of course from High School Musical and all that stuff, where she plays Chantel and everything like that. So I'm aware of her and Brittany Snow. Ashley Tisdale and Brittany Snow are actually really good friends in real life, so they get to play like best friends in the movie, so that's nice. There's not really any other ones on here that I particularly recognize necessarily, or that were major characters in the movie. But that's what I have. I do very much enjoy this movie. It is kind of like the slice of life type of a thing, with a little bit of like the fantasy element thrown in there with like through Shizuku's writing and everything. So we have that. The next one, I believe, is supposed to be Princess Mononoke, which is definitely going to be a longer video given all of the story nuances that happen there. But that's what I have. I thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!